All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, hello. Welcome once again to the 2024 MinnPost Festival. Very grateful that you all are here, and I'm very excited for our next session with author and journalist David Rohde. So, as you've been hearing folks say throughout the day, thank you all for being here. MinnPost, a totally community-supported, nonprofit, paywall-free news site. So this festival is both about ideas and about the kind of journalism that MinnPost does all throughout the year. You all and our sponsors and supporters for making today happen are also helping make MinnPost work all throughout the year happen. So thank you to all of our sponsors, and I couldn't be more excited to have the tremendous honor of moderating our next session. Mr. David Rohde is, there's a very long bio I could do, but I promised I would do this relatively briefly, and then we'll have a full conversation that hopefully you all will ask us lots of questions for. But he is an author, a journalist, an editor. Some of the publications that he's worked for include the New Yorker, the Christian Science Monitor, the New York Times. Right now he serves as an editor of national security at NBC News. Some people might know him because of a story, a very prominent story that he was very much central to, where in 2007 he was actually kidnapped by the Taliban and held for a number of years. I think a much more positive, wonderful way to also remember him is he is the winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, or parts of teams that won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And he is the author of multiple books, including Endgame, In Deep, and what we are going to talk about today, his brand new book here, Where Tyranny Begins, the Justice Department, the FBI, and the War on Democracy. So please join me in doing a big round of applause to the MinnPost Festival, to Mr. David Rohde. All right, thank you so much for making time to, and I will say thank you for making time because you have a very busy day job, which has been very busy just lately. But I mean, even with that, I'll ask that in this term. So I hear a lot of people talk about in the last 8 years, people say sometimes, oh, it feels like we're just reliving 2016 over and over and over again. And you wrote a book where you really actually leaned into going back to 2016 and going through a bunch of the machinations leading up to that election, the things that came out of it. And so I guess both like personally and professionally, why did you want to write this book?
My wife has asked me that question many times. My 2 daughters, who are 15 and 10, don't really care. You know, they just know I have more time with them now. First of all, thank you, Tane, for having me here. And the MinnPost is an amazing publication, and I'm thrilled with this to see you all here in such a beautiful, amazing, inspiring place. I'll be honest, it's a little bit of what we talked about before. Part of what inspired me to do this is idealism. I wanted to understand what had happened in the Justice Department and the FBI through the incredibly contentious years of 2016 through this spring, through the Biden administration. And it was sort of an unprecedented era where actually fairly or unfairly, public confidence in the FBI and Justice Department has dropped dramatically. It's dropped far more dramatically among Republicans and Democrats, but even Democrats have been frustrated because they wanted to see quick prosecutions of Donald Trump as a former president, and that hasn't happened. And you mentioned earlier my misadventure with the Taliban. It was, you said years, it was 7 months.
Oh, I meant it was the year 2007. I apologize.
No, it's totally fine.
Not years, so my apologies.
But we can come back to that later. But I covered the Civil War in Bosnia in the 90s. I'm not a young journalist. And then I covered Afghanistan after 2001. And so I've sort of seen conspiracy theories and how they play out on the ground in other countries, how they divide people. And I now see conspiracy theories at work here, and how people lose faith in government institutions, they lose faith in democracy, their form of government. So for all these reasons, I plunged in.
So you plunged in, and we should say, for folks who are going to read the book, it's not an easy book to do, both because it's very detailed and you really go through a number of stories which will be familiar to people, but you go into extreme depth and talk to many people, and yet that piece of it was really challenging because many people to this day, even things that happened 4, 6, 8 years ago, they don't want to talk about, or at least on the record. And so, I mean, can you help us? What is that? What explains that? What is that worry, hesitation, and how did you sort of navigate it?
Yes. So the author, excuse me. Yes. So the author's note says one of the most difficult parts of this book was getting people to talk to me. The level of fear, both from people who served in Republican administrations or in Democratic administrations in the FBI and the Justice Department. And that's a reflection of a theme that I'll talk about here, but our hyper-partisanship, our kind of, I think, intensifying tribalism has really penetrated the DOJ and the FBI. They've long histories. There's been all kinds of abuse, obviously, particularly the FBI with J. Edgar Hoover. But there was a pretty extraordinary period from sort of post-Richard Nixon when reforms were enacted at the Justice Department and the FBI to make them much more independent and nonpartisan. That this idea, and it's a central theme of this book, I believe that our democracy, particularly in a time of hyperpartisanship, needs more nonpartisan public servants, not less. We need election clerks who count votes fairly. Whoever wins, they count the numbers fairly. We need judges who interpret the law in a judicious, fair way, if you will. And we need nonpartisan election clerks, nonpartisan judges, and nonpartisan journalists who do their best to sort of describe events in an impartial way. And I'm worried we're getting away from that. And I work at NBC News. I go on MSNBC, and my exciting takeaway from the book is, we need more nonpartisan public service. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I love Minnesota.
Yeah.
I'm from Maine, so we have a lot in common in terms of cold and darkness.
and civic participation and these good things. So let's maybe just do some of the timeline and some of the characters, because there's a prologue to the book sort of about documents case, which we can come back to. But starting in that 2016, Donald Trump is in office, and Justice Department is kind of trying to figure out, like, what are we doing here? Like, what is happening? And there's actually one of the early kind of like things that is all of a sudden like, oh, this is different, is the announcement of what was sort of dubbed the Muslim ban, the ban against new people coming to the United States from a handful of predominantly Islamic countries where people are Muslim. And the piece of this, though, that the Justice Department is shakes them is they get no heads up about this, basically. It is something that just sort of like he goes out and announces and says, this is happening. And everybody sort of at the department is like, well, what is happening? So can you help us who have not maybe been inside? Why is that such a strange and, norm-breaking thing to happen for a president to make a giant policy move like that without going through the Justice Department first?
Some spinach here, some civic lesson. The post-Watergate Attorney General. So look, Donald Trump won the election in 2016. He won the Electoral College, fact. And again, we have to accept that. He therefore had a mandate from the American people, American voters, to carry out his policies. So post-Watergate, John Mitchell, Nixon's Attorney General, you may have remembered, was like prosecuting Nixon's enemies and sort of trying to use the Justice Department to score political points. Since then, in a remarkable 50-year period, I'll get it right, but anyway, Republicans and Democratic presidents let the Attorney General, had them implement their broad policies, crack down on violent crime, crack down on environmental polluters, but the president should never involve himself in the actual individual criminal cases. individual civil cases. Like a president shouldn't use the Justice Department to file an antitrust thing against some executive who didn't give him enough of a campaign donation. So Trump arrives, and I talked to these career civil servants. Many people spend their careers in the Justice Department serving Republicans, the vast majority. There's it's a very large department when you talk about it nationwide, but there's only, I would say, several dozen political appointees, and then there's tens of thousands of other law enforcement officials and U.S. attorneys that serve under the Attorney General. But Trump comes in, and he just issues this executive order from the White House, and they have no idea. They haven't even seen it in the Justice Department. Normally, an executive order is reviewed by the Justice Department to see if it's legal and constitutional. And one of the main characters in the book, his name is Jody Hunt. He worked under Republicans and Democrats, and he's sort of in his 50s now. And, he arrives, and, I'm sure, not to, joke about blue and red, but if you remember, the big hero in the travel ban, at least for liberals, was Sally Yates, the acting attorney general. The travel ban arrives. She's an Obama appointee who's just waiting for the new attorney general to get confirmed by the Senate. That would be Jeff Sessions. And Sally Yates sends an email to the entire Justice Department and orders all the lawyers to not defend the new president's executive order in court. That outraged Jody Hunt, who really feels and if the situation were reversed, if it was a Democratic president and there was a holdover Republican and they refused to, stand up to this executive order, people would be outraged.
Right.
And that's the sort of beginning of this tensions and the first signs of how different Donald Trump sees the legal system and the ways he tries to use it.
And over again, going back to those Watergate reforms that you referenced, one of the themes in your book, even at that point in 2016, but even in some ways where we are now, the Justice Department is living in a sort of mindset, a lot of them, of this is our culture, this is our norm, these are the rules that we play by. We are nonpartisan. We don't go out and get involved in sort of the scrum of politics one way or the other. And over again, they kind of get eaten up by this, or this comes back to bite them. Shellacked, and so, you have a quote early where somebody in the Justice Department is quoted as saying that there becomes almost this idea that we're in an LOL nothing matters kind of mode. And what did she mean by that?
Yeah, this is from Erica Newland. She was a young woman, again, a career civil servant working in the Office of Legal Counsel. They analyze executive orders and normally would tell a president whether something's constitutional or legal or not. And she also tries to work at first to sort of help, Trump, and Jody Hunt felt, and many people in the Justice Department felt, that the presidency would change Donald Trump, and instead Donald Trump changed the presidency. And so it was actually in Lawfare. I don't know if you know this. It's a website that's got a lot of great legal writing. An author there coined this phrase to describe sort of Trump, the strategy of Trump and his backers towards the legal system, and it's called LOL, laugh out loud, nothing matters lawyering. And it's a completely different view. Some of it's Roy Cohn, the sort of infamous New York lawyer who was in a way a mentor to Trump. But the goal of a legal filing, the goal of an executive order, isn't to win in court or necessarily even get a policy implemented. It's a little bit of policy. But LOL, nothing mattering lawyering is about three things. One, winning the news cycle, having some explosive big thing in the news cycle and drawing lots of attention from it. Two, owning the libs, like getting, liberal outrage, and the more outrage, sort of the better. And three is, if possible, like impressing Donald Trump. And it's a very different approach to the law, and Trump sort of learned this in New York, a city with a lot of corruption, as we've seen in the last few weeks, which has made, I think, Donald Trump very cynical about idealism and public service. And, to be fair to him, maybe that's why he's got a dark view of it. But the goal was to use the legal system to win, to score political points and sort of comms, communications points. And a lot of lawyers, it took them in the Justice Department, it took them a full year to figure out, and this is what Erica Newland said. She realized, and she regrets that Erica Newland's Jewish, and so she spent the first year of the Trump presidency trying to she thought she could restrain Trump by saying, White House counsel, this ban is, improper. And, she realized in hindsight she regretted staying. She felt that she should have resigned immediately and left, that she ended up enabling Trump. And I mentioned, that she was Jewish. And she also worried that would she have been like a kind of bureaucrat in, Nazi Germany.
This is one of the most powerful, just quotes to get out of someone I've ever seen in a book. No, I'm so glad that we got it, because, a lot of folks are very nervous to speak to you or to go on the record. And if she has this piece where she actually almost volunteers, I worry if I had been, a civil servant in 1930s Germany, would I have been someone who just sort of pushed the papers around, tried to do good as best I could? Maybe, I think she has a piece where she says, maybe I could have found some loophole to protect Jewish citizens who were already citizens of Germany, but would I've done more than that? And she's literally grappling with that here in thinking about what she's doing in real time in the Justice Department. And I thought, as a personal reflection of how much can I do, what is my responsibility, it was a very vulnerable thing for her to talk about in some way.
Yeah, this wasn't any great feat of reporting. She wrote an op-ed for the New York Times in December 2020 describing the regret she felt. But there were thousands of lawyers in the Justice Department who didn't know what to do. And I think it's very important, again, that an unelected official, a bureaucrat, some might say, does what an elected president says, as long as it's legal and constitutional. But she really regretted that experience, and she spoke to me. She wrote the op-ed. She also interviewed George Packer, an extraordinary writer for The Atlantic now, and formerly The New Yorker, who's a friend of mine. So she's been very courageous in sort of saying that, we need to, people should resign. Other people, and we'll talk more, like Jody Hunt, stayed. He felt that it was his role to sort of uphold the law and respect the voters' choice.
So because part of the book's narrative follows different characters, and Trump has he has sort of 2.5 attorneys general, if that's fair. But it starts with Jeff Sessions, who in a lot of ways, if you were to write, I thought, the character description of in 2016 of who would be Donald Trump's Attorney General, Jeff Sessions seems like the guy to do it. He's tough on crime, extremely tough on the border. He really spearheads a child separation policy in a lot of ways. And at first, in the very earliest days, it seems okay, this is Trump's guy. And it turns on a dime when the Russia investigation sort of comes and all this relationship completely collapses. So can you maybe just talk us through that piece to refresh our memory, I bet?
Sure, and Jeff Sessions was one of the people who talked to me at length, and I'm really grateful to him for that. I know, again, I shouldn't be guessing. I mean, I'm from New York City, so I shouldn't guess that Minneapolis leans blue. But he, Jeff Sessions, it means, border crackdowns, one of the most conservative members of the Senate. Before he was in the Senate, though, he was a Justice Department prosecutor. He was a low-level prosecutor in Alabama, and then he was appointed the U.S. attorney by Ronald Reagan. And so the unique thing about him that many people didn't think of was that he was actually one of these people who had the culture of the independence of the Justice Department in him. And so in his very first day as Attorney General, he chooses as his chief of staff Jody Hunt, the person who I referred to, who had been working in the DOJ for about 20 years, was from Alabama. And Jody was nervous but said, this is a good sign. He wants a career person from the Justice Department to be his chief of staff. He respects our culture. He respects my knowledge from working in this building for so long. In their first meeting, these other career people come up and say, Mr. Attorney General, we have to brief you on a very important matter. And they sit down in a private room and they start saying the FBI is conducting an ongoing investigation of the Trump campaign and whether it cooperated or coordinated with Russia. And from multiple people who witnessed this, Jody Hunt on the record and Sessions himself, Sessions put his hand up and said, stop talking about this investigation. Stop right now. And he said, I have a conflict of interest. I was a senior official in the Trump campaign. I cannot oversee the investigation of the campaign I was part of. And he was exactly right. He was upholding a norm that's existed for 50 years. It's a no-brainer for any lawyer, crystal clear. That decision, which he stood by for 2 years, destroyed his political career. Donald Trump destroyed him, berated him in private, berated him in public.
He traveled around the country.
Yes, he tried. Sessions tried to run again for Senate, and he had that Senate seat, I think, for at least 20 years. Like, Democrats didn't run a candidate against Jeff Sessions. He was so popular in Alabama. But he, upholding that ideal, like...
That notion, and it was specifically, he recused himself. He said,
yes.
I will not oversee, I will not get involved. I cannot.
He said, how can I lead this institution? How can I ask all these lawyers and career people that are here, and FBI agents, and ATF agents, and all these law enforcement people to follow our norms if I don't follow them myself? But I won't go into all the details, but it's a very ugly thing. Jody Hunt is sitting in the Oval Office when Sessions finds out that Robert Mueller has been named as a special counsel, and Trump is obviously there. And there's a famous sort of scene in the Mueller report where Trump hears that Mueller's been appointed, and Trump sort of slumps in his chair behind the desk and says, I'm blanked, if you remember. It starts with an F. And the reason we know that is because actually Jody Hunt was in all these meetings with Sessions and Trump, dozens of them. He would go home at night and take notes because he thought he was like witnessing history. Those notes eventually went to the Mueller team. So there are all these footnotes with Jody Hunt's name in them.
Can we dig in on the Mueller investigation a little bit, because it was something that the need to appoint a special counsel or a special prosecutor was something that the department felt like it had to do for some of these reasons that you were talking about. This became, it did become sort of I remember just sort of the news cycle around this thing became sort of all-consuming. It was daily on the front page of different, what is the latest turn of the wheel of this? When are we going to hear something? Who are they talking to? These kinds of things. I'm just wondering, looking back, which is a wonderful part of hindsight, is whether there were things that the Justice Department at the time, I don't know, frankly, regrets about how they put that together, whether there are pieces of it that, the political system took and ran with that made their jobs a lot harder to actually do what they needed to do. And if they had known it had been like that, they might have tried to approach it differently.
Yeah, again, Mueller is this Vietnam, war hero, FBI director post 9/11, and this sort of unimpeachable reputation. And I want to move very quickly. I don't want to spend all this time talking about this stuff. But the Mueller investigation worked. Rod Rosenstein, if you remember these names, he was the Deputy Attorney General. He oversaw the investigation, and he protected Mueller. Trump attacked Mueller. Trump did all this unprecedented stuff on Twitter, and Trump successfully got, a big chunk of the country and most Republicans to not trust Mueller even before the report came out. No president had ever dared interfere in a criminal investigation because they thought they would end up like Richard Nixon. And Donald Trump systematically, the first chapters of the book are about the different strategies he uses, and one is to discredit, another is to spread conspiracy theories, another is to destroy norms, and Trump did that with Robert Mueller. He won this. And another just quick fast forward is that Bill Barr comes in as the Attorney General. One of the people who talked to me was another person who protected the Mueller investigation. His name was Ed O'Callahan. And there's this scene where Barr, unveils the Mueller report. He sort of spins it, makes it sound as positive as possible. And standing behind him is Rod Rosenstein and this guy, Ed O'Callaghan. He's a big Irish guy with a beard. He told me on the record that as he heard Barr sort of going beyond the report and painting a favorable picture of Trump, they both, this Justice Department tradition of having a very straight face, and those, they're like, it's kind of funny, but they like trained to do this. Ed O'Callaghan watched Barr say this, and he just thought to himself, this is a mistake. Barr is sort of spinning this politically. And the question is, again, why didn't he speak out at the time?
Yeah.
Why didn't people resign? And it's just, there's a pattern of sort of underestimating what Trump would do and how far he would go.
I mean, and so that, again, that's another illustration of these norms running up against a very different kind of playbook. Like Bill Barr, the Attorney General at the time, the Mueller report comes out, he gets it. And so he is able to put out a summary and sort of talk about what is in this report, and in a lot of ways, like craft the narrative, at least at the beginning of what this is. Trump picks that up, President Trump picks that up, and he amplifies sort of this narrative that he and Barr are running with. And that is what is out there for a period of weeks, I believe, before the actual report.
There were summaries pre-written by Mueller, and Barr didn't release them. Instead, he gave this press conference, and then it was several weeks until the full report came out. But I just want to take a minute to explain Barr. Now, Barr didn't talk to me. I wrote a profile of Barr for the New Yorker that he did not like. I talked to many people around him, but he said he felt I was a liberal journalist, and he wasn't sure talking with me would be worth the time. But Bill Barr took the job as the Attorney General not to sort of serve Donald Trump. He's a lifelong conservative. He's a deeply religious Catholic, and he has felt that the Watergate reforms, the creation of special counsels and a more independent Justice Department, another thing was a 10-year FBI director to get it out of the cycle of a president and to not have another Hoover. He felt all these maneuvers, and this is sort of, many people in the Federalist Society believe this, were weakening the presidency. And that this is a very large country. He gave a big speech about this as Attorney General, and that you need a strong president if there's a natural disaster or civil war to keep the country together. And he said, if you look at American history, the branch of government that saves the country is the executive. He also felt, as an observant Catholic, that people that are religiously observant in America are sort of mocked and under siege, and by this all-powerful left that dominates Hollywood and the media. He was very angry about the 70s Supreme Court that enacted Roe v. Wade. All these different sort of social policies, he felt they should have been passed by law in Congress, showing that the majority of people supported them. So he came in and defended Trump and was very openly political because he wanted to save the presidency. And you may disagree with that. I just loved seeing, and we'll talk about this more, just the way people rationalize. It's not that Bill Barr is sitting around saying, I want to end American democracy. He thinks he's the hero. He thinks he's defending the country. And we, again, live in these camps and bubbles, and that sort of scares me.
And I mean, to that point, we should, as long as we, just to put like one last piece with the Mueller report, I mean, what Mueller does ultimately find, like, you cannot, there is not enough evidence here to like take President Trump to trial. Is that a fair reading of that?
There was not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the Trump campaign cooperated or colluded with Russia.
Which infuriated a lot of liberals that wanted that to be the outcome of it.
And there was all this kind of endless stuff. And I work for NBC News. I should have said this at the beginning. I work for Lester Holt. He is my ideal journalist in terms of a down-the-middle facts journalist. And that's NBC News, and I respect what MSNBC does. I do interviews on MSNBC, but yes, there were a lot of legal commentators on MSNBC saying that there's more evidence. He's a Russian agent, and I think you have to, again, an election clerk, a judge, a special counsel, again, a special counsel is appointed to be independent and handle a politically sensitive criminal investigation, and I think special counsels work. and they're valuable. They might be too slow sometimes. So people, I believe Robert Mueller. I don't think there's clear proof of collusion or coordination with Russia.
We are going to open it up, or we have Laura and some other volunteers coming around and collecting questions. So if you have one of your questions written on a card, hold that up, and they'll collect those and bring those here. But this giant theme of the book of these 70s norms in some ways that have existed for 50 years running up against a different playbook. I guess the question, it feels like those were not working, how a lot of people would read it. But what is the alternative to that? Because I don't think that we want, I mean, I'm guessing
Yes.
from reading your book that you don't want necessarily, or we aren't advocating here one way or the other, but for a Justice Department that all of a sudden gets in the fight. That seems like an odd prescription.
So quickly fast forward to the August 1st or 2nd of 2018. I should know this by now. Biden's in office, and there's a high-stakes meeting about searching Mar-a-Lago. Trump's out of office. He's had these classified documents for more than a year, and there's a war going on.
This would be 22, I think, then.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank God you are here.
I did something.
That was, yes, Biden presidency. That would start in 2020. So it's August 2022, and so there's this. It's a meeting on the top floor of the Justice Department. I'm sorry, of the FBI, and it's a sort of all these senior FBI officials come over all these senior DOJ officials come over to the FBI for what they hope will be a come to Jesus meeting, where they can finally agree, the DOJ and the FBI people looking at Mar-a-Lago, what to do next, and bluntly, whether or not to carry out the first ever search of a former president's home. They had been arguing for weeks about this. And they go into this meeting, and it devolves into a shouting match. They're screaming at each other, they don't trust each other, and the head of the Washington field office for the FBI, his name is Stephen D'Antuono, he spoke to me on the record. In the end of the meeting, he just says, I am not searching Mar-a-Lago. We're rushing this. And it wasn't that he was in the tank for Trump. What I found was that these career people tend to be biased towards their own institution, towards their tribe. And he was arguing, if we do this search, we're playing into Trump's MO. We're playing into his conspiracy theory of the evil, jackbooted FBI searching Mar-a-Lago. On the other side, there were more senior FBI officials and most of the Justice Department officials who were like, he has had a year. He has had more time than an average American gets. We have to uphold the rule of law. And there had been earlier, if you remember, Trump had handed over his lawyer 36 documents, said these are the last classified documents. And after that, in late July, they'd gotten surveillance tape showing that just before they showed up and got the 38 documents, a couple guys in Mar-a-Lago had moved dozens of boxes, had hidden them before the DOJ people showed up to get the last 38. And so they search Mar-a-Lago, and Trump, again, turns them into jackbooted thugs. But
I mean, he takes to X, Twitter, whatever it is at that point. He goes on his platforms, and he's saying this is a total violation.
Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And this has never been done before, and it's completely unprecedented. But there were more than 100 classified documents found in the House. And again, this is what I'm talking about. Is this the suspicion, the pressure? I mean, all of the DOJ and FBI officials involved in this actually wanted no part of the Mar-a-Lago case. None of them. They were like, this is a lose-lose situation. They had friends and colleagues who worked on Trump-Russia. Andrew McCabe, and he made mistakes, but he was like fired by the FBI, and his pension was taken away from him. And that was like a huge blow to these people who don't make very much as FBI agents and like career prosecutors. And the danger is that I had one FBI official who supported the Mar-a-Lago search, and you talked about changes, and we can talk about that in a bit, but he was like, we need to be more transparent about what we're doing, because they searched Mar-a-Lago and the FBI and the DOJ said nothing for the first 2 days. There was an attack on an FBI field office. A guy tried to ram his car and get in it. And I found there were actually attacks on 3 more FBI field offices, but the FBI didn't make them public. Then Merrick Garland got up and said, I ordered this search, I take full responsibility, but by then all of the conspiracy theories had spread, and just quickly this FBI official who didn't want to be named, he's left, but he's afraid of going public, he said that the FBI and DOJ have to change. They have to be more open and transparent with the public. And he said, like, in the digital age, in a hyper-partisan age, trust me doesn't cut it. And I do think there are major reforms that need to be made in the DOJ and FBI.
And again, just to, because we're a lot of the book and we're focusing a lot on the Trump presidency and the things that did to undermine or change norms in the system. We were talking a little bit before the program that there is space for things like this to happen on the other side of the political aisle as well. That when a very similar sort of classified documents, and people will argue with whether it was similar or not, but that President Biden had been found to have some classified documents. There was another investigation into him, and that came out to a report through Robert Hur, and there was maybe not the same kind of language that a former President Trump was using, but there was a very political response to what came out of that report.
Yeah, and again, this is the, and I want to go to your questions, but the, Hur comes out with a report. You may remember this. He has to explain why he didn't prosecute Biden. Biden had far fewer documents, but there was a small number that he had kept for quite a while in his basement. And he said he forgot they were there. There were notes about Afghanistan. And but Hur famously puts in his report that he didn't prosecute Biden because he would come across as a well-meaning older man with a memory problem. And the White House just savaged Robert Hur. Political hack. He's attacking the president's memory in totally unfair way. Biden gets up at a press conference and said, they raised Beau's death. This thing came out where he couldn't remember Beau's death, like what year it was. And
his son. Yeah.
The death of his son who died of brain cancer, who clearly, and we're all human beings, clearly Biden was, cared deeply and was devastated by the loss of his son. But a colleague of mine, Ken Delanian at NBC News, was able to get a transcript of the interview between Robert Hur and Joe Biden, and it's Joe Biden. They ask him, what year, did you find the documents, or what year, something, and Biden said, geez, when did Beau die? And that was and he couldn't recall the year. And I'm not trying to be unfair to Joe Biden, but to make a long story short, the debate happens between Trump and Biden, and through no fault of his own, Joe Biden has a memory issue, and the public sees it. And so it was disappointing to see Democrats so savage Rob Hur, who was just trying to kind of explain why he didn't prosecute Biden. I
mean, I bring that up in large part because, again, to me, one of the central themes of the book and what it seems like is this fight, as you said, this rah-rah for a nonpartisan, independent justice department as best we can have it. And but that is it's a hard thing to sort of rally people around, let's all be shades of gray, in a big fight that's happening. But that seems to be kind of that's where we are trying to push towards.
I'm going for the counter sales pitch, boring fairness, idealistic thing. Maybe people are getting so tired of all this that might appeal to folks. But I do think that's what we need. It is getting dangerously polarized. Our inability to agree with basic facts, who won the 2020 election, is, I worry, we're not near any kind of civil war. I don't want to say that. But I see the same patterns of when you talk to both sides, they each see themselves as defending democracy. I mean, there's no question to me that many voters who support Donald Trump do think the 2020 election was stolen. They really believe it, and they think they're defending democracy.
So, question from the audience, which is a good sort of, these things that you're talking about, very worrisome. They're wondering how much more scared, I guess maybe, should we be following the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity? How much does that potentially ramp up the stakes?
And again, I'm back to the spinach here, but so that decision comes out and it seems crazy. John Roberts, who was seen somewhat as a moderate, wrote that decision, and he says that all conversations between the Attorney General and the President are absolutely immune from being investigated as criminal. That is far broader than anything that existed under Nixon and any president for 50 years. It was an extraordinary ruling, but the mentality behind it, this again, is this idea of a weakened presidency. That again, all these reforms have weakened the president, and we need a strong president to save the country, and a president will be paralyzed if they think their private conversations with their aides are going to end up having a special counsel, and parsing them. But it does create a danger, and whether you don't trust Kamala Harris or you don't trust Donald Trump, a president now can take office on January 20th, but Joe Biden could do it now and say, I want you to go prosecute that person, and it's completely legal.
I have one last kind of fun question from the audience, and then I have one last question for you, but I'll ask this one, which is somebody says that they remember from a Senate hearing, Attorney General Barr, before his appointment, being questioned about a friendship between the Barrs and the Muellers. And Barr was quoted as saying, the Barrs and the Muellers will continue to go to dinner together. Do you think that that is still true, this person wants to know?
I don't think it is, but I would say it's this. I did not find a deep state. I did not find like a secret pro-Biden or pro-Trump cabal in these places. But our hyper-partisanship is sort of destroying the common values we share. And I think they were friends, Mueller and Barr. And Barr made this, makes this decision on the Mueller report. He thought there never should have been a special counsel with Mueller. I mean, many of these people the Republicans who worked for Trump in the beginning were like, they thought it was absurd that Democrats seriously thought he was a Russian agent. Whereas clearly many Democrats were like really genuinely afraid that he was a Russian agent. And I would explain this to them, like, again, how tribal we've become. And then to Bill Barr's credit, he does, in the end, turn against Trump. When it's the 2020 election, Barr is pressured to come up with proof of all these false votes, and Barr says publicly, no, it's not true. And again, I want to be on a positive note here. Dozens of federal judges in December 2020, Republicans and Democrats, Trump appointees who'd only been in office for a couple months, ruled against Trump. And the branch of government that, I think did the most to save democracy in 2020 was the judiciary. The danger now is that you have these sort of more extreme decisions, this absolute immunity case coming out from the Supreme Court, and you have Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida, who's very unusual. She's made some very pro-Trump rulings in the past, and again, the more senior of the appellate court in Atlanta, there's 2 Trump appointees who overruled her over and over about the Mar-a-Lago case. So I'm just sort of desperately pointing at the examples of people doing the right thing, and that's still possible. And one small little detail, and then the FBI and the DOJ are changing, good or bad. It's just interesting, Trump is like a messaging savant, say what you want about him. But one of the things they changed was in the court documents about Mar-a-Lago, younger DOJ folks and FBI people had this new idea, let's put pictures in these court documents. Let's put pictures in the indictment. So that picture, the famous picture of the top secret documents on the flower, thing, I talked to somebody who, talked about choosing that picture. The pictures of the stacks of documents in the bathroom, the pictures of the boxes of documents in the ballroom. And that was a way of sort of fighting back, that there was a way to kind of change and evolve as an institution for the digital age, for a hyper-partisan age, and to be more transparent. And I'll leave you with, I can...
that was going to be,
Yes.
My last piece is that looking forward, and it sounds like the answer to this, at least in part, is yes, Are you seeing that, I don't know, some of the antibodies in the Justice Department pushing against some of the things that are potentially corrupting it, like are learning to operate differently? Is there something, A, that you feel like is happening, and B, I guess maybe the question is there anything that we all, like as citizens, should be looking for, or even potentially like, asking about whenever this might come up, of where we're trying to go, I guess, in terms of that like we want the nonpartisan Justice Department?
So most opinion polls show that 75% of Americans don't trust the Justice Department and the FBI. 85% are Republicans. Merrick Garland, I talked to many people close to him. He thinks the best thing they can do is just sort of do their jobs and speak in court and not be too public. He's also given a ton of speeches where he talks about these traditions, but he just doesn't break through in this age. There's not any viral memes of Merrick Garland saying, "We will follow the facts wherever they go."
Which is because he's been doing a lot.
He's
a busy attorney general, yeah.
And then to his credit, and just back to Mayor Adams, it's we can get into the Trump trials, and I mean, I found that the system was working. And one evidence of that is that the Garland Justice Department has prosecuted Hunter Biden, a guilty plea and a conviction, Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Texas who was getting money from Azerbaijan and a Mexican bank.
Bob Menendez.
Bob Menendez, thank you, who was getting, Gold bars.
Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey.
And then now Eric Adams, which is the last thing the Harris campaign wants right now, is the biggest blue city. So the system is working in that sense. But there were a lot of good Republicans who sort of were more conservative, who think Trump went too far, who worked under Trump, who really felt like that Trump never had a chance.
Yeah.
That he was immediately attacked by the media, and they saw the Mueller investigation as a way to block him from carrying out his agenda. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but it's again this danger of our norms, like we won the election, you get your chance. And it blows off steam. Your side gets to run the government for 4 years, and then maybe the other side does. And it's a miracle that we, have had the peaceful transfer of power, not totally in 2020. And I'll leave you just with a sort of contradiction. I apologize for this, but it's something involving Garland, who so utterly believes in the need to be nonpartisan and the importance of enforcing the law equally, upholding the rule of law. So Merrick Garland, his grandparents fled Nazi Germany and survived the Holocaust. They came to the United States. He grew up in suburban Chicago. And he, as a child, just was, he revered the American legal system and upholding the rule of law. And his very existence on this planet is because his grandmother was able to come to the U.S. Yes, she faced discrimination as a Jew, but she didn't have to worry about a death camp. And so I was talking to his inner circle, and I said, don't you see how, I'm not going to talk publicly, and how reticent he is. The only time he gets emotional, and you've seen this in a few hearings, is when he's he was accused of being biased against Catholics. And he sort of, whenever he talks about his family in the Holocaust, he chokes up. And so I've said to them many times, to his people and his aides, you have one hand tied behind your back today in this hyper-partisan, environment. A politician can just smear you and tweet and do whatever they want against you. And, Garland has told his aides that I will never let the Justice Department become a political player, a partisan player. Yes, the Justice Department has one hand tied behind its back as we fight this out today. But he said if the Justice Department ever becomes political, that is the end of the rule of law. So it's sort of contradictory. Is he too weak? Is he not? But I will just go back to the election clerk and if Donald Trump gets the most votes and election clerks say he did and judges say he did, he is the president. And that will probably scare many people in this country. And if Harris wins, And that's clearly what the courts say. And all these elections, these 9,000 different electoral, it's a good thing in a way in this country, the way there's 9,000 state and local bodies that count the votes. It's very hard to carry out a conspiracy. And people will be scared on the other side of this if Harris wins. So I ask you to be idealistic and optimistic. I hope Congress can enact reforms that will make some of these norms in the Justice Department laws. And we faced a huge challenge in the 70s, and we reformed and grew, and I hope we can do that again now.
On that note, can you all please join me in a big round of applause, David Rohde,